We'll move to our Commission General Regulation Workshop. This is informational, but public comment will be allowed. Persons wishing to provide comment on regulation are requested to complete the regulation speaker card and present it to the recording secretary. So that's the green card, and that's simply to track the comments we get during our regulatory workshop period. We'll start with item 7, Commission General Regulation 456, Special Incentive Elk Arbitration Panel, LCB file number R031-15, Game Division Administrator Brian Wakeling. Workshop public comment allowed. The Commission will consider permanent adoption of a regulation relating to amending the Nevada Administrative Code 502.42283, by which the Commission may facilitate decisions by appointing or serving as the arbitration panel should arbitration of elk incentive tag awards become necessary, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. A workshop on the temporary regulation was held on March 20th, 2015, and the temporary regulation was adopted on May 15th, 2015 at the Commission meeting. An additional workshop was held on August 7th, 2015 at the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners meeting, and no further changes were made. The Commission adopted this regulation as a permanent regulation on September 26, 2015. However, on October 27, 2015, the Legislative Commission deferred the regulation. So just to be clear, if you've seen this before and you feel like this regulation is Groundhog Day, it is, but we're trying to deal with the Legislative Commission's concern at this point. So this is maybe quite literally the 7th and 8th time we've discussed this matter. But with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Wakeling. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Brian Wakeling, the Game Division Administrator for the Nevada Department of Wildlife. By my count, we are exceeding 10 now. When we first brought this up, it was a letter from the White Pine County CAB. They'd pointed out the challenges associated with trying to make arbitration decisions with a local board. And for that reason, they had actually recommended that the Commission consider adopting NAC that would take that from that local level and provide a broader perspective on that, to give the Commission or the arbitration panel less of a myopic view of it, and keep their eyes a little bit broader, not tie their hands so tightly. The Commission did take action on this. We did both adopt a temporary NEC that was used for one arbitration process already. We have adopted a process to go along with this. As you mentioned, we had shared this then after adoption of final NAC with the Legislative Commission. They chose to defer that back. The phrase that they specifically had issue with was in Section 3, the decision of the Commission or the arbitration panel appointed by the Commission is final and binding on the parties if it complies with the provisions of NAC 502.42253 to 42283, inclusive and of applicable laws of the state. It was our understanding that those references certainly dealt with the situation adequately. The Legislative Commission had concerns about that. At this point, the department is recommending that. By the way, that was not new language. That was language that had been in the NAC previously. At this point, the department's recommending that we simply delete that reference and make the fourth bullet the third bullet and address with it in that fashion.
Thank you, Brian. Questions for Mr. Wakeling? Any discussion by the Commission?
Was there an explanation as to why this struck language is problematic?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Johnson, Brian Wakeling, what the specific concern was whether or not this actually created a final and binding decision that could not be pursued. Litigation couldn't be pursued. There couldn't be appealed in any way, shape, or form. That was the concern that was brought up. It was our impression that the Legislative Counsel Bureau had reviewed it. We also felt like these other references to statute and state law dealt with that. That was not their perspective, and consequently we they chose to defer it.
Additional questions or discussion? Okay, seeing none, County Advisory Board input on item 7, our workshop on the elk arbitration panel. Okay, public comment, Las Vegas? Seeing none, public comment in Reno on item 7.
Yes, for the record again, Fred Volz. I have some concerns about this draft policy. I know it's been through many iterations and the legislative commission has deferred it. But the question really is this really a policy or is it a regulation? And does it rise to the level of a regulation? At the recent Administrative Policy Committee meeting, one of the things on the agenda was Policy 3 and appeals. That's policy. It's not a regulation. And in the recent rehearing of the coyote killing petition, it was deemed that that wasn't worthy of a regulation status, that it could be dealt with potentially as a policy. So this seems to be completely inappropriate to have this as a regulation, and it would seem wise to rejigger this and propose it back as a result to the Legislative Commission that would be dealt with as a policy and perhaps included under the existing Policy 3 as an addendum. Thank you.
Next public comment, Reno.
No, we're all good here.
Okay, Elko, anything on item 7, public comment?
No comment in Elko.
Okay, with that, we'll bring it back to the commission. Any discussion, proposed changes? This is a workshop, so I'm not looking for an action at this point, but if there's no suggestions, what we'll do is move it out of workshop as shown in support material under item number 7, with essentially on page 2, the strike through on item 3 and the renumbering of item 4 to item 3. Is there any proposed changes? Discussion? Staff's clear on that direction? Okay, with that, we'll close the workshop on CGR 456 and item number 7 on our agenda. We will move to item number 8, Commission General Regulation 458, Electronic Rifle Triggers, Caliber and Cartridge Length and Smokeless Powder Restrictions, LCB file number R144-15, Chief Game Warden Tyler Turnipseed. Again, this is a workshop. Public comment will be allowed. The Commission will hold a workshop to consider regulation relating to amending Chapter 503 of the Nevada Administrative Code. It revises provisions relating to hunting, deleting the prohibition against the using smokeless black powder in a muzzleloader firearm while hunting big game mammal under certain circumstances, making it unlawful to use certain firearms and cartridges while hunting a big game mammal and providing other matters related thereto. This is kind of a 3-part regulation. As you'll see, I think Chief Turnipseed will step through those 3 items. Each item was recommended kind of from a different place. We had some cleanup language on the smokeless powder, and I think Tyler will get into the history of that. There was actually a sportsman conservation group that made the request for discussion on the electronic rifle triggers, and the caliber and cartridge length was something that was proposed by the department, and they worked with me on addressing it, and all of these things I was comfortable addressing through this open and public process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tyler. I know there is a video clip at one point in the presentation. When we get to that video clip, I would ask Reno to stay on mute and go ahead and play their video in the room, and then once it wraps up here, we'll make sure your video is complete and we'll move forward. So with that, Chief Turnipseed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, Tyler Turnipseed, Chief Game Warden at Department of Wildlife. And as you said, I've got a short PowerPoint that is a visual aid to talk about some of the issues. And on those slides in Reno and Elko, we'll skip the first video on slide 11 and we'll play the video on slide 12. I believe the 2 remote locations have those. As you said, Mr. Chairman, this regulation amendment deals with 3 independent topics, so we'll bite those off in small pieces. The first being some of the confusion over black powder substitutes. This was dealt with in, I believe, 2013 and 2012 and 2014 We'll talk about that part first, then we'll move on to the electronic triggers or smart rifles. This is some new technology that's sort of coming, I think, out of the military world into the civilian world. And then we'll look at the caliber and cartridge length, also something that's coming from the military world into the civilian world. So that first part there, if we could move to the second slide, talking about black powder substitutes. I guess it was me that was supposed to move to the second slide. So prior to 2014, this regulation, it's NAC 503-142. In subsection 1, it describes what's legal for a hunt that's designated as a muzzleloading only hunt. And it read as follows, describes the hunting during muzzleloading season for a big game mammal, and it said, the use of smokeless powder is prohibited. Only black powder or a black powder substitute such as Pirate X or 777 may be used. A new powder came on the market called Blackhorn 209. And of course, I wasn't the chief game warden at this time, but as I understand it, there was a desire from a lot of sportsmen and maybe this board as well to make Blackhorn 209 an acceptable powder. We got a lot of inquiries from the public. We ended up sending out this letter in 2011 stating that Blackhorn 209 was not a legal powder to use because, based on its chemical makeup, it was more closely considered a smokeless powder than a black powder substitute. It gets into some chemistry. I didn't do well in chemistry in college, but I'll get to the makeup of it here in a minute. So at the pleasure of this board, a couple years down the road, the language was changed, taking out some of the brand names that said such as Pirate X or 777. I think it was discussed at the time that would solve the problem and allow some of the newer black powder substitutes like Blackhorn 209. When that regulation was enacted, a lot of us at the field level felt that it hadn't solved the problem yet because those using Blackhorn 209, our research from the MSDS about Blackhorn 209 showed that it was made of nitrocellulose and a nitrate ester, which makes it, by definition, a smokeless powder. Black powder and black powder substitutes are carbon-based, made of carbon and potassium nitrate, so we felt that the NAC still prohibited the use of Blackhorn 209. I felt that it was the board's desire back in 2014 to allow the use of Blackhorn 209, but I think to do that, my idea was just take out that sentence, the use of smokeless powder is prohibited. I felt that would be the one sentence we needed to get rid of to accomplish what I felt was your goal a couple years ago of accepting that as a usable powder. We submitted that to LCB. They came back with an additional language addition that said only black powder or black powder substitute may be used as a propellant, except that smokeless powder may be used as a black powder substitute if the muzzleloading rifle or muzzleloading musket is specifically designed for its use. I was okay with that language addition. Like I said, that part wasn't my idea, but I didn't think it changed the meaning of it and still accomplished what we needed it to do. And Mr. Chairman, do you want to take questions on these as piece by piece, or you want me to move through the whole regulation and then take questions at the end?
I will ask the commission if they have any questions on this portion, and then we'll move to the next part, and then we'll take public input altogether.
Great.
Are there any commission questions on this portion? Commissioner Young?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tyler, excuse my lack of knowledge on black powder hunting, muzzle loading, but is it essentially the difference and the reason that smokeless is not allowed is because it's so clean and it doesn't foul the rifle, and it gives an advantage to a person using the smokeless? Is that really the difference, or is there something else beyond that as far as its ability to propel around?
Yeah, Commissioner Young, I'm assuming that was the intent when this regulation was originally written, and at that time, there were no smokeless powders that could be used in a muzzleloader just because of the burn rate and the pressures that they developed. You know, if you loaded your muzzleloader with 4831, a common centerfire rifle powder, it'd likely blow your gun up, or excessive pressure, that sort of thing. When Blackhorn 209 came onto the scene, it was new to all of us. Essentially, chemically speaking, it was a smokeless powder, but they figured out how to slow down the burn rate Added some fillers so that the measuring amounts are similar to other black powder substitutes, and then added some stuff to make it smoke, essentially for visual effect. So a new thing on the market that we hadn't dealt with before, and said, well, this is a black powder substitute as they market themselves, but chemically, in our eyes, it appeared to be a smokeless powder. So I felt that it was illegal to use. Because of that line, the use of smokeless powder is prohibited.
Who did the chemical work for you guys?
One of our prior captains, Cameron Waithman, did a lot of the research about their MSDS. A lot of that information is proprietary. Of course, Blackhorn doesn't want to tell you what it's made of, but that MSDS is public information, and looking at that was how we were able to figure out that it was primarily nitrocellulose based. Nitrocellulose, in our minds, makes it a smokeless powder.
Last question. Do you know of any other state that allowed this product to be used as a substitute for black powder?
I know a lot of western states have wrestled with it, Utah specifically. I don't know how they've shaken out the issue, if they've allowed it, if they've changed their language, or if they've kept prohibiting it. I know it was big on every state's radar a couple years ago.
Thanks, Tyler.
Additional questions on this portion? Commissioner Bliss?
Yeah, Chief Turnip Seed. Are you aware of any other smokeless powders other than the Blackhorn 209 that can be used in a muzzleloader?
Chairman Bliss, again, Chief Turnip Seed, I'm not aware of any. I personally haven't shot Blackhorn yet. I'm still using Pyrodex in my muzzleloader, but I've not done that research to find out if there are other powders on the market that are also nitrocellulose based. I know there are a lot of powders out there now that are advertising how clean they burn, and I know that was one of the discussions about Blackhorn, is that people could shoot 10, 15 rounds without cleaning their barrel, without running a patch through their barrel, which, as you probably know, would have been unheard of with some of the older black powder substitutes. When we got to looking at it, figured out, well, yeah, it burns so clean because it's nitrocellulose based and it's basically a smokeless powder. I know there are other brands on the market now that advertise being able to shoot, numerous rounds through their barrel without cleaning, so they may be also some of that same chemical makeup.
Yeah, and that is one concern I have with opening it up, is I think we need to find out if there is other ones, and what does it do to the muzzle velocity? Is it going to open the door is it going to open the door to where we start moving further and further away from the traditional muzzleloading hunting so I don't know. I've heard that there's other companies, gun manufacturers that can shoot smokeless powder, and it's loaded from the barrel. I'd like to know a little more background, if there is or isn't, and what it does to muzzle velocity, if there's going to be a bigger... I don't have a problem with the advantage of the gun being cleaner, but I do have an issue if it's going to turn the muzzle velocity way up, and then pretty soon it's no different than shooting with a centerfire cartridge.
You bet, Commissioner Bliss, and quite honestly, I've not done that research. I don't know what it does for them as far as muzzle velocity. I'm like you, I hunt muzzleloader. I want to keep it primitive on a personal level, but yeah, I don't know where that puts us going down the road as far as muzzle velocities and how much of an advantage it's going to create over traditional black powder substitutes. I'm not aware.
Additional questions or comments on this portion? Okay, seeing none.
All right, we'll switch gears a little bit and move on to the electronic trigger portion. A lot of people refer to these as smart rifles. What this is, I had never heard of this technology until maybe in the last few months or a year. And essentially what it is, it's a laser-controlled computerized scope that adjusts itself to all the factors that you would traditionally think of in long-range shooting. It calculates velocity, ballistic coefficient, elevation, temperature, barometric pressure, all that sort of stuff that affects your bullet path at long ranges, curvature of the earth even. How it works, there's a company called Tracking Point Rifles, and I'll show you a video about them in just a minute. They're marketing a product in which, as they describe it on their website, you acquire your target by pushing a button that projects a laser and essentially paints that target with your laser dot, and then you depress the trigger. Once the trigger is depressed, you move your crosshairs up towards that laser dot, and when your crosshairs get to the laser dot, the rifle fires itself. They guarantee half-inch accuracy out to, one of the videos said 1,200 yards. Another one in the video we're going to show says 1,800 yards. They call it the mile maker. They guarantee half-inch accuracy at those ranges on a target moving up to 20 miles an hour. Once it's got laser lock, the gun locks on, adjusts itself, and you basically make the gun go off when the crosshairs get up to your laser dot. This is what it looks like. It's got, you know, all the computer that's on board to make those calculations. It's got its own Wi-Fi. Your hunting buddy could be sitting at home on the couch watching the real-time view through your scope because of that Wi-Fi processor in it, or Wi-Fi technology in it. You'll see in the video the person makes a shot with the rifle not even looking through the scope because he's using the Android goggles that are connected to the scope through Wi-Fi. That way he's able to make the shot without looking through the scope, looking down the rifle. Again, I think this is one of those places where we're getting things that are coming out of the military world that are very applicable in Afghanistan and Iraq, but probably, you know, not something that the public wishes to have in the hunting world when it comes to fair chase. So as I said, we're going to skip slide 11 and move on to slide 12, and at this point this will be about a 5-minute video that gives a little bit of background on what tracking point rifles are, what they do, and so this would be the point where our remote locations would hit their mute button and play the video.
Okay, Reno, are you good for playing your video on your end?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, and we'll probably need to mute our end so our audio is not over the top of them. Can we do that? Or you may want to turn your audio down so you're not hearing our video, or vice versa, without losing our feed. All right, Tyler, why don't we try it?
Okay, and Monty, I don't know if I have a play button here. I may need you to hit the play on this one for us. And I'm sorry, let me fast forward to the next slide. Okay, let's hit the play button on this video.
We're here today with the Tracking Point XS1 precision retail ski goggles that are enabled for Android. We're going to stream video from the networked tracking scope on the precision-guided firearm to the goggles. This is going to allow one of our team to take a long-distance shot using just the goggles without having to see his target. We've taken a soda bottle, filled it with commercial explosive, and placed it more than 500 yards downrange. He's going to tag the target, squeeze and hold the trigger, and bring his reticle back over the tag, only using the streaming video from the PGF to his goggles without having a line of sight. Let's see what he can do.
Tag set.
I'm Todd Townsend here at CES 2015. I'm here with Anson from Tracking Point. Now, Anson, I'm looking here at what you got, and we're at a tech show, biggest tech show in the world. This is not a toy gun. This is the real deal, and it's got a whole lot of really interesting technology that's nowhere else in the world yet. Tell us a little bit about what you got here.
Yeah, so what we've introduced at Tracking Point this year is the first internet-based gun, essentially. It's a precision-guided firearm. It's a fully integrated system. So we've taken our Linux-based network tracking scope, paired it with a guided trigger, a trigger link that actually controls, the scope actually controls the trigger. We have a barrel referencing system that actually self-zeros the gun over time. We have a power source in the buttstock, a lot of things going on that make long-range shooting easy.
So you said that the scope controls the triggering system, so it can actually fire the weapon when a target's acquired automatically once the computer feels it's in play?
Not automatically. You still have to squeeze the trigger as that shooter, but it's not going to fire until that ballistic solution is met.
Got it. Okay. So you hit the trigger by accident or you pull it, it's not going to fire until the computer thinks you're dead on.
Exactly.
Wow, that's
exactly.
And what's the range? I think you guys are talking about crazy range for even an amateur with this system.
Yeah, so what we've introduced here at CES this year is what we're calling the 338 TP, or the mile maker. So this will actually tag targets out to 1 mile, even moving targets up to 30 miles an hour.
Wow, oh my gosh. Now, in the picture, you've got a guy with the glasses on here, and he's reaching over a berm or something, but looking and shooting, and these are the glasses right here. How do these work? The shooter wears them, and you can kind of see where you're aiming?
Yeah, so basically, within this right here, there's what we call a heads-up display screen, much like Abrams tank technology or jet fighter technology. In there is a Wi-Fi server that streams video to any smart device, smart tablet. It also streams to wearable technology, and in this particular case, it's an Android device. We partnered with Recon glasses. This allows the shooter to, in a military defense situation, to shoot from a covered position around a berm, over, behind a wall, a barricade, to stay out of line of oncoming fire. But it also enables, it really enhances the hunting experience. So it allows you to stream video to co-located individuals. They can sit there and share in that hunting experience. For mentoring applications, it's great. You can sit there, if you're with a young person, you can identify whatever they're shooting at and make sure that they're on the right target. Right. But it allows you to really stream to anybody securely through the internet around the world. So you could have a father in Austin, Texas, who is sitting on his couch looking at a TV, and he could have a son in Africa on a safari, and they can connect to one another and share that hunting experience real time.
And so a little bird told me here too that the military's interested in this. They're testing it out. They see something promising here. I can see all kinds of applications. Just like you have drones now and you can track what's going on with the cameras, the military can see what their snipers are doing real time.
Absolutely, and they can at that point decide whether or not a sniper or whoever is on that shoot, determine whether or not they want to send that round or not. They can go on a command. That way everything is controlled. Right. It also records audio and video. So you can have you can go back and see what that shooter saw. You can, from a civilian standpoint, you can download that to social media, email it to friends and family. But, back to the defense or law enforcement side of things, it helps with liability situations. Sure. Anytime there's a shooting, it's a he said, she said, there's a lawsuit. This actually allows you to go back in there, pull video, and see exactly what transpired.
Well, you're moving to smart weaponry, just like the military did with the smart bombs in the early 90s. So you only shoot what you're supposed to shoot, and you can have eyes on it, have more people saying go or not, and you know what you're doing. There's a safety factor as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, this is really cool stuff. I wish you the best. We don't see a lot of this type of thing here at CES, but it's good to see the modern technology, especially Linux-based, being put into something like this out there in the field. Good luck.
Cool. Thanks, Todd.
Right, have a good time. For CES 2015, I'm Todd Townsend.
So that's just one video. Well, do we need to get Elko and Reno back?
We'll wait for Reno and Elko. We can unmute our end.
Reno's done.
Okay, so your video is complete. Elko, are you good to go?
Yes, we are good to go.
Okay. All right, Mr. Turnipseed, please proceed.
As I was saying, this is just one video I grabbed off of YouTube. If you go to the Tracking Point Rifles website, they have a whole bunch more videos that show what these things do. I don't know if you caught it in the video, but he said that particular rifle, they call it the Mile Maker. It'll track targets out to a mile that are moving up to 30 miles an hour with that laser tag. Have any questions from the board on this portion?
Commissioner Valentine?
Yeah, Chief Turnipseed, do we not have something in our NAC or NIS that restricts laser scopes? And would that have any impact on this NAC?
Thank you, Commissioner Valentine. Chief Game Warden Tyler Turnipseed again. We do have a regulation that talks about projecting a beam forward. We dealt with this a couple years ago in laser finding, or range finding scopes. The point of the thing that differentiates them there is a visible beam. In other words, a visible laser beam is prohibited, something that would actually project a red dot onto your target, but an invisible beam like this one is not prohibited, just like a laser rangefinder.
Commissioner Young?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I've always had a pretty stern use of technology out there in the field beyond a rifle, a regular traditional scope, and the person's ability to use that weapon. Do you think it's possible to draft a regulation, Tyler, that would, prohibit all the various types of? I was out at the SHOT Show the other day. There's so many different things out there now in technology. It's just like the military. I mean, it's ridiculous to think that we'd have a hunter out there in the field with a military-styled weapon, like that gentleman there that was demonstrating that, shooting at a deer or an elk. He's not even looking at it, but a video camera is. And I've always been a big Second Amendment person, but I'm beginning to almost think that Obama makes a couple points, because I can see that being used against a police officer, a politician, or nuts like those kooks up there in Oregon from the Bundys, in the hands of civilians. And I think there's got to be a point and a limit, and certainly in hunting, there's absolutely no place for this as a sports person, and speaking from a sportsman's perspective here. So that's my comment and question. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, Tyler.
You bet, Commissioner Young. Chief Game Warden Tyler Turnipseed again for the record. Like you said, that the applications for this are a little bit mind-boggling. It sounds like science fiction. Prior to hearing about tracking point rifles, I never dreamed that we'd ever be having this discussion. Certainly, I think a lot of people would agree that it doesn't have a place in the hunting world. I did hear some comments, coming back from the county boards on this portion of the regulation, and then on the third portion that we'll talk about in a minute, talking about, fair chase ethics and our ability to legislate ethics. A lot of people would argue that we don't legislate hunting ethics and that sort of stuff, and I would probably disagree with that. Half of this NAC and NRS book is made up of things that are about fair chase. Statutorily, some of the new people that are a little bit newer to the county game board process may not realize that's exactly what the NRSs charge you guys with is your authority. NRS 501-181, Section 4A talks about manner and methods of take, manner and methods of how to take wild animals. Whether it be the size of net that you're using for bait fish or barbless hooks, anything like that. I'm starting to get a little philosophical here, but I think that's absolutely our duty is to talk about the manner and means of take on how people do it. We can talk about Boone and Crockett's definition of fair chase, all that sort of stuff, but might be more than what we're looking at. Did I answer your question, or did I go off?
Yeah, it did, and it's pretty obvious from the video that the tracking point folks focused on hunting. He brought it up, and his mind-boggling opportunities for hunting. He used a couple examples. So we're going to have these technologists. They're going to be pushing us to the hunting world. They don't care if it's used for civilian self-defense, military, or hunting. As long as they sell their product and they make money, they're not going to not focus on hunting. I'm sure they'll be showing up at other things besides the SHOT Show and pushing these products. And I think the sooner that we get on top of this, the sooner that we nip it in the bud, the better off we are before people start actually purchasing something like this and using them in the field. If it's not in our current regulations, based on what you said on Commissioner Valentine's question about the difference in the lasers. So that's my thought and comment. Thanks.
You bet. That particular video talked a lot about military and law enforcement applications. Some of their other videos are very much geared towards hunting. That's clearly the market they're going after there, and why the reason we're looking at it.
Additional questions or comments? I had just one, Tyler, and that is, we had a bill passed last session, and we'll be looking at regulation going forward, enabling some of our disabled citizens to hunt and get some opportunities in the field. And Commissioner Bliss, you might be able to address this, but is there anything in the regulation that gives us a concern on that end? Are those opportunities provided more or less mechanically without computer or electronic device?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman Drew. I looked at most of the stuff that I've seen with the folks with disabilities and the aid of pulling the trigger and firing a gun has been mechanical. It's either through a setup that they can bite, and it actually is a mechanical mechanism that goes around, similar to like a brake cable on a bike or something that'll pull the trigger. They also have some out there that you can either suck or blow into a straw, and it'll you know, the trigger will fire, the gun will fire. So I don't see anything in there. The only other part is, I mean, there's some folks that may be quadriplegic that aren't able to get over and look into a scope, but they got like an eye scope or a camera that they can look through the scope and see a monitor, so they're able to fire or to see what they're aiming at, but it has no link to the trigger. It's a mechanical action that would operate the trigger. So I don't see it, and I appreciate you bring that up.
Exactly, Chairman Drew, Tyler Turnipseed again. I completely agree with what Commissioner Bliss just stated. I spoke with him briefly about this, and also talked to the folks from Cody Lock Dreamkeeper Foundation in Winnemucca that does hunts for disabled folks, and they said the same thing that Commissioner Bliss just said about bite triggers, hydraulics, or an actual button that runs a cable like the brake on your kid's bicycle. So I guess I should back up a little bit and read the actual regulation change. What it says is that it is unlawful to hunt a big game mammal with any firearm that is equipped with an electronic or computer-controlled trigger. When we went to write this, we looked at several different iterations. You know, do we need to address the laser beam? Do we need to address, you know, which portion of this do we need to address? Felt that this was the simplest way to go about it, that just said, you know, if we prohibited computer-controlled or electronic trigger, we felt that would solve the problem that we were looking to fix.
Additional questions on this portion of the regulation or comments? Commissioner Valentine?
Thank you, Chairman Drew. One more question, Chief Turnipseed. I'm kind of against regulations. Is this even possible to regulate in the field if somebody's carrying this weapon and hunting illegally?
Commissioner Valentine, Chief Game Warden Tyler Turnipseed. It's a good question. You know, like I said, a year ago, I never dreamed that we'd be having this conversation, that this technology never occurred to me that would happen in my lifetime. So if we address this one, then what comes next down the road? I guess the answer is I don't know. I think this regulation, specifically talking about electronic or computer-controlled trigger, I believe addresses what we just saw there. As for what comes out next year at the SHOT Show or CES show, I don't know, because like I said, I wouldn't have predicted this one a year ago. I think this accomplishes what we need it to, but as far as what's next down the road in technology, I don't know.
Additional questions or comments? Commissioner Johnston?
I guess I have, I look at this, and I mean, I just look at that rifle, and I've never thought that would be available to the people, the general public. Then I think about 15, 20 years ago, if you talk to people about advancements in what we consider a standard rifle scope today, they probably might have had the same discussion. Well, that's not fair chase. And so I don't know where it ends, and I don't know where the regulation stops. And it's not that I'm opposed to this regulation. I don't know where we draw the line and say, all right, no more technology from here on out in the hunting world. It was, you know, I can think of laser rangefinders. You know, those are relatively new if you think about it. And would someone say, well, I don't think it's fair chase for you to be able to pop this thing and say, okay, this animal is 250 yards away. But at the same time, I think now people are like, that ability to determine range and distance precludes wounding of animals and may result in better shooting. So on the one hand, when I look at the fair chase issue here, and I think it exists, on the other hand, I think if technology can help avoid wounding animals and more efficient shooting, I don't know what the balance, I don't know what the policy decision is. because I can see where someone say, if someone can be more effective with this weapon and it will result in less wounded animals, I don't know what the outcome is. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know what 10 years from now the technology will be. It kind of frightens you. I heard the other day that we have more computing power in our iPhones right now than existed on the Apollo spacecraft that went to the moon. So that's my comment. You know, I just don't know where this ends and what the right decision is. I see these videos and I think that shouldn't be used for hunting. And I think about other technology that's come about and I think, well, we're not opposed to that, and I think there are competing interests. So,
Additional questions or comments? I'll just follow up Commissioner Johnston's comment with, you know, I have a very strong belief, if you haven't noticed, in process. And I think this body exists to deal with issues like this. I think that's why it was in our charge that whoever wrote the regulation establishing the Wildlife Commission and its duties put manner of take in that definition. I think this body is best equipped to answer those hard questions. It certainly doesn't make our job any easier, and I think you identified that. But I think you have to identify and address these issues on a case-by-case basis. And in this particular case, I look at that one, and I think I have an issue with this, and I think a lot of other folks do.
I guess my one final comment, when I heard the tracking point representative talk about the computer-generated ballistic solution, and the gun will not fire until that ballistic solution is solved, and they're talking about the distances, that's quite, that gets to me where I'm more leaning towards this is beyond fair chase and beyond a fair manner of take, because it's not the individual that's actually solving the ballistic solution, for lack of a better term. It's the computer that's doing it for them. So,
Commissioner Young?
Just a follow-up comment, and I totally get where you're coming from, Commissioner, about not liking to enact more regulations. Paul, I certainly respect your opinion, but I do think that, I agree with the chairman, this commission is here for a reason, and one of those reasons is to make a balance and strike a balance between what's always the issue that we face out here is there's a lot of people that don't like our sport of hunting or taking of animals in any way. And I think at some point we got to save ourselves, or save themselves. And this is just common sense. And when you eliminate skill and it's no longer skill-based with an opportunity or a chance that you may miss and that animal may get away from you, I think that's right where that is. This eliminates that chance of you missing, because there's no skill involved in this. You know, they made that very clear. The video camera will only allow the trigger to be fired once the target is acquired. And that is, it's not that complicated for us to think that through and write a regulation that, you know, I think Tyler's done a pretty good job getting this there just with using the electronic trigger or the language that he's proposed. I think there's going to be more stuff coming out, and I think we're going to constantly be moving in there, but I think that's our responsibility, is to ensure that use the word fair chase, or that term, is always the focal point for us, because I think we'll lose the public in a big way when I'm talking about the broad perspective, and I think that common sense and people today will look at somebody going out there in the field with a rifle like this and say, really? You call that hunting? And that's where those of us that hunt ethically, and it is a sport, and we practice and we work at it, and sometimes we miss a shot and say, darn it, missed it. I wish I would have been a better shot. That's part of the deal. And when we lose that, we've lost this as far as I'm concerned. There's no reason for us to exist at that point. So I'm all for this, Tyler, and every time we see this technology, I really appreciate you. Any technology, from drones to trail cams with satellite phones and everything else, I think we gotta look at it.
Additional comments or questions on this portion? All right, Tyler, go ahead with the last of our three parts.
Can you start us back up again, Monty? That actually was an excellent discussion that I think segues perfectly into our next topic. This is something that that I've thought about for a while and mentioned to Jeremy, within the last year or so, and said, we've got a minimum caliber and cartridge size, or minimum caliber line drawn in the sand in our regulations, but there's not a maximum ceiling. Never really worried about that before because people were hunting with 30-06s and 270s and the traditional stuff we think of as hunting rifles. In the last 10-15 years, I've started to hear more and more about 50 BMGs. This picture here is obviously taken from a military perspective. It's 50 caliber BMG, stands for Browning Machine Gun. As I understand it, it was developed over almost 100 years ago now, but obviously strictly in a military application. In the last few years, it's started to transition over from military applications more into the civilian world. When that happens, then of course people start thinking, hey, maybe this would be cool to hunt with. So I talked to Jeremy about it and said, or to Chairman Drew about it and said, is this something we should look at? And I started looking at some other states. Idaho did it a few years ago, but they took a roundabout method and said that they wanted to limit the total weight of the rifle, scope, and sling to 16 pounds. Chairman Drew and myself talked about it and said, well, let's throw it out there to the public process and see what the public thinks. So there's a couple visual aids here. This is a chart showing some of the more common hunting cartridges from the small on up to the big. Several years ago, I used to think that the one second to the biggest there, 338 Win Mag, I was always of the opinion that, man, that's a huge rifle. I can't ever imagine shooting something like that. That's just a monster gun. What would you ever use that for? And you see how it's tiny in comparison to the 50 BMG round. There's another one here showing it against a dollar bill. It shoots a 750 grain bullet, an incredible amount of powder. There you see, I can't read the photo. I want to say it's stacked up next to a 300 Win Mag. 300 Win Mag, a lot of folks would say, hey, that's a great elk cartridge, a lot of knockdown power, and again, it looks puny next to the 50 BMG. So we started looking at ways to address it, or if we should address it, and said, okay, well, if we don't look at the weight of the overall rifle, then let's look at actually the caliber. So, okay, it's a 50 caliber. If we limit it to 49, is that going to have someone that, wildcatter in their garage takes a 50 BMG round, necks it down to 48 caliber? And there are people doing that, of course, developing all sorts of, big new latest and greatest stuff. The other thing we looked at was overall cartridge loaded length. Like I said, there's a minimum that's talked about in regulation about minimum loaded length when it comes to hunting with handguns. And if you look at this chart here, it shows some of the loaded lengths of some of the common rounds. You've got, like I said, some of the big ones there that we used to think of as big, being 300 Win Mag, 338 Win Mag, and then probably the granddaddies of them all, 378 and 338 Lapua. Looking online, I'm not a gun nut, as you can probably tell, but overall loaded length of the 3378 and 338 Lapua, depending on how you load them, comes in about 3.6 or 3.7 inches. That 50 BMG round is almost 5.5 inches, 5.45. So we said, okay, if we draw a line on maximum loaded length, it would put us somewhere around 3.8 inches. In listening to some of the discussion at the cabs and some of that, that's something that we may need to adjust, because I think when hand loaders hand load for their 338 or their 3378, one of the goals is to load them as long as you can so that when you seat the round in the chamber, the bullet is up against the lands. So it may be a little bit longer than that 3.8. I heard the term or the number 4 inches thrown out there as maybe a better alternative. That would be a change I think we could change between now and the action item without having to go back to LCB. So again, I've never shot one. I've held one in my hand at the hardware store, and it was pretty impressive, but dug around online. Here was a photo I just pulled off of some blog where an elk hunter was saying, we brought the Barrett that trip too, just in case. We had it set up on a burn area and could see for 12 to 1,400 yards, but nothing stepped out in the kill zone. The long-range shooting trend is something that's come about in recent years, and I'm not totally opposed to that. I bought a 257 Weatherby a couple years ago to play with, and I love trying to see how far I can shoot it. But when you're talking about a 3378 or a 338 Lapua, it takes a lot of calculation and doping your wind and you know, everything's got to be precise to make that shot work at long ranges. As I understand it, when you get behind one of these 50 BMGs, I myself, as a fairly rookie shooter, could get behind one of these things and shoot 1,500 yards without a problem. The other issue with that, when you start looking at this round and a 750 grain bullet, is of course what's that do to the animal when you hit it. You know, we're all concerned about using your meat. I personally live a lot of my year on elk meat. I'm lucky enough to be able to do that, and I'm of the opinion that if you shoot something with this round and shoot it through the shoulders, what's that going to do to the steaks that you're going to take home? That's where we came up with on that. As I was cruising the internet, I found this little meme that I think kind of sums it up. Again, as your discussion just prior to this portion, I'm not here to say, you know, what this board's responsibility is. Obviously, those are the hard decisions that you guys have to make, and this one might be a little tougher call than the last one. And I'd stand for questions.
Just before we get to questions on this one, Tyler had brought it to my attention and what Idaho had done, and I felt that the 16-pound weight was kind of a roundabout way of getting to what you could say more directly. And so I said, how about a cartridge? And he said, well, what he just said in terms of someone necking something down on a smaller cartridge. And at the Douglas Cab meeting, a gentleman actually identified the 416 Barrett, which well under the caliber restriction we have, but when I looked it up, it's got an overall load length of 4.5, or just in excess of 4.5. So I think the combination was good. Again, I have no problem running it through the public process and figuring out where the line is. So that's why we're having this particular discussion. Questions or comments?
I just was going to comment, Jeremy, really quickly. This is Kirsten Hebbs. I just wanted to say for the record, I'm very pleased with all the comments today and the prudent behavior by all of the board, and I really respect some of the hard work that's been done to keep up with technology. That's going to be harder over time, but I really commend hearing how one envisions hunting and the responsibilities a hunter has, and also the sensitivity to the public and how the public might perceive technology that's too advanced for our current environment.
Commissioner Bliss?
Thank you, Chairman Drew. Chief Turnipseed, as a hand loader myself, I do load quite a bit, and there is some truth to the 3378s, the overall length being longer than the 3.8 inches. Would it be cleaner and easier if you just went off the length of the case instead of the loaded length? Because then you could limit, it would take a lot more work instead of someone necking something down or any, going to that extreme. It'd be real extreme to actually have to shorten a case and, because your rifles are chambered for certain measurements for all that. And so maybe figuring out an overall minimum case length and a maximum case length and not really tie it to the overall length might be easier.
Thank you, Commissioner Bliss, and that's actually a great point and speaks to your expertise on the subject matter. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. I think that would be a great way to go as well.
Additional questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. I'm sorry, Commissioner Johnston.
Yeah, I'd just make a comment because I was looking at the caliber and that, and I couldn't think why anybody would be hunting with a rifle like this. I can't imagine trying to carry one on a hunt, but in any event, I was just compared it to, I know there is I believe it's a 500 Jeffrey that is a hunting caliber, and I've been on a hunt where a professional hunter was carrying that rifle, and I just looked it up, and it's a massive rifle, but it's for dangerous game in very particular areas, and it goes up to, I believe, according to what I just pulled up, about a 535 grain bullet. You're talking on this one up to 700 grain bullet, even larger. So I don't know if it's caliber or what we look at, but certainly I don't see how you impact anybody saying you're not going to hunt with this 50 caliber BMG military rifle. I mean, do we even have any evidence that anyone actually hunting with these in Nevada?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Johnston. Tyler Turnipseed for the record again. I have started to hear about it. I sort of anecdotally called out to some of my wardens and said, hey, are you hearing about people using these? Specifically called Scott Giles, our Ely warden, and he said, yeah, I am starting to hear about people killing elk with 50 BMGs. I heard a story about someone in the western region, I think in northern Washoe or Pershing County, shooting a doe antelope with one at 150 yards, and from what I understand, the outcome was ugly. But you make a good point. We wrestled a little bit with how to do this effectively without some unintended consequence, and it was brought to my attention that there are some old black powder cartridges that use a 50 caliber bullet, and I don't recall what those are. Again, I'm not an antique gun nut of any kind. I want to say there was a 5110 and a some old antique black powder cartridges that shoot a 50 caliber bullet. Certainly that's an unintended consequence. We're not looking to restrict those if somebody hunts with one of those. In 18 years, I never saw anybody in the field using one, but that certainly doesn't mean that they're not out there. So yeah, I think that's a possibility. And I guess I was remiss. I need to back up a little bit. I never actually read the regulation change to you. It reads, it's the second portion from the electronic or computer controlled trigger. Basically says it is unlawful to hunt a big game mammal with a rifle if the rifle uses a centerfire cartridge that is smaller than caliber 22 or larger than caliber 46, or a centerfire cartridge with an overall length more than 3.8 inches. That way the caliber over 46 and the overall loaded length over 3.8 go hand in hand. And using the term centerfire rifle doesn't affect muzzleloaders, because of course a lot of muzzleloaders are 50s and 54s, so this would not hurt them.
Additional questions? Commissioner Bliss?
Chief Turnipseed, what about the new muzzleloader that's out by Remington that actually shoots the ignition system is a primer? Are you aware of those? If you look at the Ultimate Muzzleloader website or the new Remington muzzleloaders that have come out, actually have a firing system that is centerfire.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Bliss. Hadn't thought of those. I've only just seen a small reference to those. So correct me if I'm wrong. As I understand it, that the ignition system looks like the base of a centerfire cartridge. Is that what you're talking about, or am I off there?
Yeah, it's basically kind of like a pistol case with the primer in it. You still load the muzzleloader, from the muzzle. I'm saying, but it's just a cleaner ignition system, and but it is a primer.
That's a good question. There again, new technology that we hadn't thought of. Using the term centerfire rifle. I suppose we could get a DAG opinion on that, but in my mind, it would still be considered a muzzleloader and not a centerfire rifle. But I'm not sure how that would shake out. I hadn't accounted for that one either.
Just a quick question. Do we know what the 3.8 inches on the overall loaded length, what would that cut off currently?
You bet. Thank you, Commissioner Johnston. Chief Game Warden Tyler Turnipseed again. That 3.8 number sounds a little arbitrary, quite honestly, because it was. What I did was looked online and said, okay, what's the common overall loaded length for what I think are the biggest cartridges? Started with 300 Win Mag on Wikipedia and worked my way up. 3378 I think was the longest I found as far as more mainstream type hunting cartridges, and I want to say it came in about 3.68, somewhere in there. 338 Lapua, same way, maybe a shade under that. A lot of those big ones are right around 3.6. As we spoke a minute ago, and Commissioner Bliss mentioned, for hand loaders, that may be a little bit longer, getting up above that 3.8. So if we stuck with overall loaded length, maybe 4 inches would be a more appropriate number. Or as Commissioner Bliss stated, maybe the case length is a better way to go, so you take out the variability of hand loaders. But the 3.8 number simply came from looking online and said, okay, what's the biggest of the big that people are out there using right now? And that was basically the 3378 being about 3.67 and cut it off above that.
Additional questions or comments by the commission? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Tyler, for now. So what I'll do is open up number 8, Commission General Regulation 458 regarding e-triggers, caliber and cartridge length, and smokeless powder restrictions to County Advisory Board input. So County Advisory Boards, if you have comments, come on up, please. And there's 2 mics. Just make sure, again, that you speak into it. And while they're coming up, just a quick sound check. Reno, are you still good?
Reno's still good, thank you.
Chairman, Commissioner, for the
ahead,
record,
gentlemen.
Bill Stanley from the Clark County Cab. In a unanimous vote, 7-0, the Clark County Cab is in opposition to all the proposed regulations changes except the electronic trigger. The Clark County Board doesn't understand what is driving changes on items like cartridge length. Also, we want black powder to remain more primitive. The discussion around the black powder was that we were just changing our, allowing a black powder rifle to substitute for a center fire cartridge's length, or as far as length of shots go. Pretty soon there's no difference. It's not a primitive hunt anymore. You have individuals out there using some of these powders and converting their black powder rifle to shooting 300 yards, and that they believed the cab. A lot of discussion about whether or not that met the definition of a primitive hunt. Thank you.
Sean Shea, Washoe County. We voted, motion carried, let me think it was here, 4-0 to deny this, the whole thing. It's because it's grouped into 3 things, and that was so confusing. Until more information on cartridge length and caliber is properly addressed, I think. I mean, you guys are flipping back and forth here all over the place on this. And I guess my biggest thing is, I'm not a rifle guy or a handgun guy at all, but you can shoot a 9mm rifle, but you can't shoot a 9mm pistol. That doesn't make sense. Why? I mean, a pistol's got a different caliber and cartridge length than a rifle does. Who's to say that some guy's not going to make a rifle or pistol now that's going to shoot a 500 caliber over 4 inches just because it's a pistol now? And I guess the whole thing was, and that's the only thing I could think of is with the 9mm. I mean, you can shoot a 9mm rifle, the same thing, and it's legal, but you can't shoot a 9mm pistol. That doesn't make sense why they're not the same. So we denied it straight through, just because of that. It was so hard to confuse just on the one. Thanks.
For the record, Gil Yannick, Carson Advisory Board. A couple of issues. When we discussed this item, there was no recommendation at this time for support or opposition, as it was felt we really didn't have enough information. Concern was expressed that electric rifles triggers would not be considered either fair chase or ethical, and caliber and cartridge length was considered a potential safety issue in having firearms with effective ranges exceeding 1 mile, and one member was concerned about the entrance and exit wound damage that a 50 caliber round could make, or possibly go through the target animal and hit another animal behind it. And so then you got the hunter in a real bag. Number of you aren't old enough to remember a movie came out in 1973 called The Day of the Jackal. That exact same thing that you saw in that video was in that movie, where it was focused on a person, followed the person, calculated the range, focused everything, and then when it was ready, it would fire. So this technology, or somebody's mind, has been working on this for 40 years. So we kind of think that a lot more thought has to go into this before we even think about authorizing any of this. Thank you.
Joe Krim, Persian Cab. We voted against the whole regulation change. We thought that the black powder aspect of it got away from the traditional side of it, so we'd like to stay with the smoke powder, not the smokeless. The electronic triggers, we thought it was just an unfair advantage to the hunter, so we struck those out completely. And the bullet length, we thought, gave the hand loaders an unfair unfair disadvantage because they couldn't load some of the bigger, more successful bullets that they wanted. It kind of limited them to only buying ammo instead of hand loading.
For the record, Corey Lytle, Lincoln Cab, we actually supported this. We supported this wholeheartedly with the one exception of the cartridge length, the overall cartridge length. The 3.8, I don't want to beat a dead horse on this. You know, we left it open for discussion. Commissioner Bliss kind of mentioned casing length. We figured we could throw around some ideas on that second part of that as far as length. Speaking from a personal standpoint, I appreciate the idea that these guys are, law enforcement's getting ahead of the curve on this. You know, we can discuss this for 3 or 4 more years. Meanwhile, it makes it that much more complicated in some regard. So we support it with just the exception of the cartridge length. One other side note that got brought up that we actually voted for was an allowance for 22 mags for mountain lions only, rimfire. 22 mags. So I wanted to throw that out too if we want to confuse things a little bit more. Thanks.
Afternoon, Commissioners. Larry Allen, for the record, Humboldt Cab. The only issue that we had here was with the caliber length and the .46 caliber restriction. A couple of the calibers that was brought up that would exceed the 3.8 was the 7mm Ruger Ultra Mag and the 300 Ruger Ultra Mag. So like what's been spoke about quite a bit, we'd like to just take a little bit harder look at maybe up in that number. Thank you.
For the record, Bob Rittenhouse from Douglas County Cab. Our discussion ended up supporting the electric trigger motion and the smokeless powder provisions, and to wait on the or table the maximum caliber and cartridge length until more information came about. Thank you.
Glenn Bunch from Mineral County. Well, in the support material that was gave to us, we read it, we looked into it, and we concurred with the department's recommendation. We feel we need to be proactive, not reactive, because we need to get in front of this, start trying to get on top of it, or we'll be in a fair chase. So, or we'll be chasing it instead of being in front of it. Thank you.
Corey, do you have a clarification for us?
Chairman Drew, I wanted to add one comment. This is in regard to a letter sent out by backcountry sportsmen, backcountry anglers, with regard to the big game mammal, and they wanted to include any game mammal, and we actually supported that too with regard to this regulation for any game.
Is that on this regulation or the next?
Was it on this one? I think it was
For
on this one
flying
with the smart
drones?
triggers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other county advisory boards? Okay, public comment in Las Vegas?
Mr. Chair, Commission, Jana Wright for the record. I certainly am in support of banning these kind of guns for hunting. I reference a Las Vegas Review-Journal article dated Thursday, January 28th, where the title was Drones, Electronic Guns on Wildlife Board Agenda. Part of the comments in the report was, critics of the electronic guns, which allow a novice to hit difficult targets with automatic firing, says it takes away from the skill-based sport. At the heart of both proposals is a desire to preserve the fair chase ethic and give animals a chance. I certainly appreciate Commissioner Young's comments, and I think that sportsmen, I don't always agree with you, but I think there are some of you out there that really, it is a sport for you. You do your own scouting, you don't use the trail cams, you don't use all the modern tools out there that maybe you could just sit in your truck and kill an animal. So I certainly support the ban of these electronic guns. Thank you.
Next public comment in Vegas, and if you have comments, come on down to the mics, there's two, and we'll have one person go and one person on deck. I know everyone's getting hungry for lunch, so.
John Hyatt from Las Vegas. The idea that a person can reliably cleanly kill an animal at a distance that they can't even see it with the naked eye basically removes all concept of fair chase and that this is a sport. I'm appalled at the idea that at 1,800 yards we could reliably kill animals when we can't even see them with our own eyes. So therefore, I would strongly urge this commission to enact these regulations which preserve at least some semblance of fair chase. And we agreed a long time ago, I think, that people are smarter than animals, at least in most cases. And therefore, we know that if the object is just to kill animals, we can do it. But let's at least have some concept or some idea of fair chase here, such that some skill is involved, and it's not just a matter of how much money I can put out for a fancy tool. Thank you.
Next public comment in Vegas. Okay, seeing none, public comment in Reno.
For the record, Fred Volz. It might all be about size to some, but while the emotional techie talk about guns and ammo might provide a testosterone rush, the proposed regulation does not go far enough. Allowing any type of technological weapon or advantage in any form is the equivalent of the government giving automatic weapons to drug cartels. No technological advantage or electronic device should be used in killing the public's wildlife, period. Here's the issue. Wildlife has no defense against the technology. The regulation needs to ban all technology advantages. Thank you.
Next public comment in Reno.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any public comment in Elko?
There is no comment in Elko, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. So with that, I'll bring it back to the commission. This is a workshop, and so I think we've got a couple of options here. We can provide some suggested changes and advance it to our next meeting for approval. We could try to split this out into separate regulations. I know it's 3 parts, and I know there's some cabs that didn't provide input. I want to try and get that. In fact, I've talked a little bit with Chief Turnipseed for providing the slides that he showed today as support material next meeting, so there's some better background on that. Or thirdly, we could ask for additional information and hold a second workshop at our March meeting. So those are a couple options for y'all to consider as we wade forward into this one. So with that, is there any discussion from the board? Commissioner Johnston?
Thank you, Chairman Drew. Going through this, the one comment that I heard that I thought was worth taking a look at as we go through the revisions is that when we talk about the electronic or computer-controlled trigger, it might be just to make this broader now and make it, rather than it is unlawful to hunt a big game mammal with, just make it is unlawful to hunt with any firearm that is equipped with electronic or computer-controlled trigger. I have no idea how this technology works and how it relates to various firearms, but is someone going to develop it next for some sort of electronic device on a shotgun to make chucker hunting easier, duck hunting? I don't know where the technology ends and how it interplays with ballistics and the movement of a gun and that, but where we never thought we'd be talking about this 5 years ago and 10 years from now. So I think it was from the Lincoln Cab and others were talking about expanding that just to make it unlawful to hunt with such weapons. I do have a concern, and maybe it's just lack of information at this point in time, with a regulation based upon the overall loaded length of a cartridge. I was just looking up some things quickly on my phone as to lengths of various cartridges, and 3.8, I was just curious as to what, let's say, a 375 cartridge length was. That's 3.6. I'd like to just get some more information on that before it advances. And other than that, I think I'm in support of the regulation in terms of the black powder as well. But those are my comments.
Okay. Additional comments? Commissioner Valentine?
Thank you, Chairman Drew. At this point in time, I think I'm happy with holding this item and looking for additional information to come forward and process that through the cabs, see if we can come up with more solid regulation.
Commissioner McNinch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Tyler, are any of these time sensitive in terms of, do we have deadlines that we should meet if we want these things to go into effect sooner than later? I know we're at the mercy of LCB and LC and that kind of stuff, but I'm just trying to get a feel for time.
Thank you, Commissioner McNinch, Chief Game Warden Turnipseed. I don't think there's a huge time issue. Of course, it's nice to have these things out by June so that it's in the hunt book. But, of course, we'd want to have them in effect by the hunting season. But I guess if we didn't make it by this hunting season, then we'd keep pushing it for future seasons. But I guess the timeline just has to do with publicizing it in the hunt book and then having it in place by the fall hunts. If we change something minor in it, we can usually do that without it having to go back to LCB. If we completely added something or deleted something or changed the meaning of it, it would need to go back to LCB, and that takes about 35 days. But if it's a minor change or changing 3.8 to 4 or something like that, I think we could probably do that without another LCB review.
Additional questions or comments? Commissioner Hubbs?
Thank you, Commissioner Hubbs, Chairman Drew, and this is Commissioner Hubbs. I just was curious. I was trying to find some solidarity too, and really interested in what the CAB members had to say today. But it seemed to me that there were many that were in agreement to the electronic trigger, except for I had down Washoe and Clark. And Carson City asking for a little bit more thought in general. But in regard to that one, if we wanted to break it up into 3 groups, it almost seems like there's some consensus to the electronic trigger at this point. That's what I'm feeling, at least. Thoughts?
I think there was a fair amount. I think I did a spreadsheet and added it up, and I think there were 8 cabs that addressed this issue. Some didn't meet, and a couple I don't think discussed it. Maybe it was because it was a workshop. So I think if we do another workshop, I think we can make it clear that we're asking for input on each of the 3 individual items and provide the additional background material. I think we'll have a more robust discussion. I think it's pretty much all developed at this point. So
I think you're right, Chairman Drew, Tyler Turnipseed again. I think some of the cabs were a little bit confused about having 3 different issues in one regulation. And I guess probably the reason for that is just that they all fall under the same NAC. It's NAC 503-142, so that's why we wrapped it up in one package. Probably would have been clearer for the public process had it been 3 different items, but since it was all in one NAC, it came at you as a package.
So with that, I think one of the things that I might propose going forward is that we advance this to a second workshop, and we request a recommendation from the department on whether it makes any sense to change big game animal to any game animal. And also a recommendation from the department on an alternate overall loaded length or an overall case length, so that we have a little more information on those 2 items. And then I'll work with you, Tyler, on putting together any supplemental information as well as a description that encourages both the cabs and the public to look at all 3 aspects of this regulation. That's my thought right now. Is there any concern with that approach? So what we would do is have a second workshop with a bit more information when we meet in March in Yerington. Getting a lot of head nods. Maybe people are hungry for lunch. Commissioner Young.
I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. I think Brad had a really good point on any hunting because the technology, I think we do have consensus on the electronic trigger and technology related to video and lasers and all that kind of nonsense. At least I heard it. But I think we should do just all hunting, not game animal. I liked his language better, Jeremy. But let's workshop it.
Yeah, and that's why I was suggesting that, because I think because it's a rifle, it's restricted to big game. I think there might be somewhere else that we might restrict it for other games. So just something we want to double check. I think having a second workshop, I don't think is going to be problematic. It encourages public participation. So if everyone's comfortable with those two items and a second workshop in March, that's how we'll proceed. If someone's uncomfortable with that, let me know now or we're going to close the agenda item. Okay. With that, we'll close agenda item number 8.